Hello and welcome to another edition of What Does the Giraffe Say Media with me, Kathleen Ratorne. We're an organisation that aims to connect people in conservation by holding live interviews. Today, I am very happy to be joined by Alexandra Howard, and we are going to be discussing all things bats today, which is one of her specialist subjects. Before we get into that, Alexandra, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you kind of got into conservation?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me all the way from America. But yes, a quick rundown is I was actually born and raised in Kempton Park in Johannesburg. But like Robin, actually, I was fortunate enough to travel throughout South Africa to the Bushveld a lot for family holidays, where I fell in love with wildlife from a young age. And then after completing my undergraduate zoology degree, I did an honors on dung beetles and then a master's research thesis on bats, all at the University of Pretoria. But I wanted a break afterwards to actually work on the ground in conservation, see what it's really like. So I worked throughout South Africa with different NGOs as a research manager. And then, of course, COVID happened. But due to lockdown, I actually spent the most of 2020 working on different reserves, gaining experience, networking, and really seeing the harsh realities of conservation. And then I have now returned to academia to do a PhD on bats. But I was really lucky to have a very supportive family and friends who always encouraged my love for animals and a career in conservation. So that's why I'm here now.
I love that. And I love the way as well that you mentioned that the fact that being in the bush is something that helped you to become passionate and to kind of really get that feel for it. So you mentioning that you're doing your PhD on bats. What is it about bats in particular that interests you? And can you talk us a little bit about what your PhD is focusing on and some of your findings that you're doing at the moment?
Okay, yeah, sure. So I don't even know where to start, why I'm so passionate about bats, but they're really awesome creatures. I have a long list of facts to try convince people, and it's something that I've really taken to and really enjoyed, and I'm embracing all the stereotypes associated with studying them. But my PhD specifically is actually focusing on the ecosystem services that bats provide, with a focus here on apple farms in central South Africa in the Free State. So far I've just actually started fieldwork, so all the findings are quite preliminary, but already from our acoustic recorders, we can see that there's a decrease in bat activity in the fruit orchards compared to nearby water bodies, which is expected. But this is some of the first bat work and insect work in the area in a really long time. So it's also just updating species lists. We're seeing that some distributions of bats, have changed, and trying to now unravel all the factors, whether it's climate change, farming techniques, landscape, chemicals, because my work is specifically focused on the farming techniques used and how that's affecting the pest control services that the bats provide for free for farmers.
And with that, you mentioned that it's been a while since that there's been any work and research done in this area. Why is that? Is it just because it's not seen as kind of cool as some of the other animals, or what kind of is the reason behind that?
Yeah, so it's more that the bat diversity isn't as high as other parts of South Africa. It's quite open area. It's Free State is the breadbasket of the country, so rolling maize fields, very big agricultural sector. But with the mountains, there's actually 2 endemic bat species that are only around these mountains, all the way down to the Cape. And we haven't found those in a very long time or know much about them. It's very sporadic records. And yes, it's more of the fact that it's a very large, it's mostly grassland habitat that's being transformed, and just quite low densities of animals in general. It's not a big conservation or protected area section like other places in SA.
I see. And typically, when you're doing your work, one of the things that I liked about you is when you were sending your biography over to me and detailing a little bit about yourself. One of the things that you said you were passionate about was kind of bringing together communities and science and breaking down some of those kind of stereotypical views of bats. What kind of superstitions are there about bats in South Africa? How are they typically viewed? And then how do you kind of try and break that down?
So to me, it's quite interesting that even though we have so many different cultures in SA, the stereotypes are actually quite similar. So many of the myths and local legends, especially with the children we work with, they always tell us that bats chew your ears and they get tangled in your hair, which is quite similar to Western cultures where bats are generally regarded as bad omens, and the hair myth seems to be a very like common urban legend across different people. So that's actually part of our broader project, is to do some awareness and education with people, try understand where the stereotypes are coming from and change the negative perception. So my colleague Monday Maduli's PhD aims to focus on the school children in the local communities, whereas my social component focuses more on the farmer stakeholders. So yeah, our Bat Box project, which we have a Facebook page for, actually includes teaching classes and including the children and the communities in a citizen science monitoring program of the bat boxes, so we can facilitate awareness and encourage engagement with a focus of the benefits of bats and addressing their concerns, their questions, and these misconceptions to show them, you know, they aren't ugly, they aren't aggressive, they don't get tangled in your hair, and really try like show them physically and theoretically that a lot of it's unfounded and that they actually help more than harm anyone.
And for those who are watching back home and they've heard all these misconceptions, or you know, there's that natural kind of bad omen thing that you were saying as well, what would you say? What kind of benefits do bats bring to ecosystems and that kind of thing?
So we call them ecosystem like service providers. So it obviously depends on the fruit bat species. So we're so spoiled because there's over 1,400 different species of bats. They're the biggest diverse mammalian group after the rodents. So our fruit bats are incredibly important for dispersing seeds and pollinating many plants and fruits that we all eat. And then the insect-eating bats are obviously important for pest control. So some species eat mosquitoes, many are eating moths and beetles that damage our crops. Obviously, there's also their guano is quite nutritious. There's a huge industry of guano mining because it's a natural nitrogen fertilizer. And then, so these all relate to keeping an ecosystem healthy and in balance. Obviously, they're quite important predators of insects, but they're also prey themselves. And now I should have, I'm trying to think. I'm sure there's one more. But even the fruit bats for regenerating rainforests, they're one of the most important seed dispersers. So obviously it depends on the region and the species, but they each play their own important role in the ecosystem.
And what are the biggest threats they're finding? Is it a case of habitat loss, or people actively harming them? What's the biggest threats? I know you mentioned there's thousands, but are there typical ones that you're seeing?
Yeah, so that one's, again, more like region specific. So in general, obviously, there's huge habitat loss and destruction, which pushes them into more urban, human-centered areas, which is why people are engaging with them more. But there is a big conflict is the hunting and persecution for sport, meat, and now out of fear. So they really are an animal that has terrible PR. But wind turbines are quite a problem in America, growing problem here. Obviously, the myths, the fear, and then white nose syndrome is what most people have heard of as one of the huge extinction risk factors in America. Whereas here it's often persecution, habitat lost, possibly pesticides. There's still a lot that we're trying to figure out, but for their size, they're one of the longest living animals, but they have really slow gestation periods. So most species only have one pup a year. So any risk is then multiplied because they're such slow growing, slow reproducing animals.
And we've got a question coming through from Stacey Sadfield. Hi, Stacey, regular visitor of the show. And she's asking, are the communities receptive once they learn more about bats, as in like not flying in your hair, etc., or do they still remain hesitant as the myths about bats is so ingrained into many societies?
Thanks, Stacey. Yeah, so it's a bit of a mixed results on that one at the moment. I think some people are more open-minded. With the children, we've definitely seen them, and even with the farmers, with some of the people, they might scientifically and rationally agree with the bat's role in the environment, but they might still not like them. Everyone seems very keen in learning more and being interested in our talks, in wanting to watch documentaries, be involved. But this is a tough one, because we can convince them and show them that they're important for the environment, but that might not necessarily change an age-old belief. So that is something we're trying to work on and see what communication techniques we might need for that. But in general, it really depends on the group. We're getting quite mixed results on that one at the moment, but there is hope. We have seemed to have changed some people's minds.
I mean, I completely agree. There's no way that you're going to suddenly change all these ingrained beliefs overnight. It is going to be a very long process. But the fact that you're starting and you're trying and that work is being done, hopefully the next generation can feed that forward and then try and stop these from continuing to happen.
Yes, definitely. And that's actually why we've focused on primary schools and certain age brackets of kids, because it's been shown they're the most receptive, to changing perceptions.
And then when you're doing your work, do you have like a typical day? What kind of things are you doing on a regular basis?
No, I love it that there's never a regular day. I'll get bored. So actually this week, yesterday, just got back from the mountains. Our team is trying to survey in the Drakensberg. But the week before, I was running around apple farms, putting up bat detectors, and then in the next coming weeks, we'll actually be physically trapping the bats, measuring them, releasing them, photographing, obviously. And then, summer is now going to be our busiest fieldwork season. Lots of insect catching as well, bat catching, monitoring, and then there'll be lots of lab work, data crunching, and hopefully, also, I have to drive to a lot of places. I've given people a lot of Ziploc bags and instructions to let me know if they have bat guano in their house or anywhere for me. So my freezer's getting full again as usual. So it's always a combination of classes. Obviously we help different projects, and then summer's always fieldwork season.
I mean, I can't imagine what any visitors to your house must think if they open up your freezer and then see the contents of what's inside.
I mean, those who've known me long enough, it was the exact same in university with lots of insects. The problem is now I have a tiny bar fridge, so there's very little space to partition things. People aren't surprised.
So we can't talk about anything regarding bats without touching on the COVID subject. I mean, they were heavily villainized and pointed towards when the outbreak happened and that kind of thing. Have you seen that that's kind of made the perception of bats worse, and people are now even more scared of it? And what's it like in South Africa? Because obviously that was more focused over in Asia and that kind of side of things. But from what are you seeing on the ground?
Yeah, so unfortunately, it's really negatively impacted bats worldwide. Even here, as soon as I say bats, more than one person has immediately just answered COVID. So the association seems quite strong, quite natural. So unfortunately, there's been reports of increased persecution due to this fear and misunderstanding. Even Bat Conservation International, a lot of the bat specialist groups have released statements and try to clarify it, because various communities, even governments, have actually been culling bats in an effort to combat the disease, not understanding that it makes it worse and it's human transmission that's the problem, not bat transmission. And also people forget we've been living alongside bats for thousands of years. Rural, urban areas, garden parks, even in your homes, and they haven't posed a threat to their human neighbors. So it has caused a huge, huge problem. Even the preliminary results from our questionnaires, both of the the children at schools and the farmers and workers, there seems to be that association with COVID, despite the fact that the current COVID-19 virus has not yet been isolated from any bat species. The recent report from China was a Rhinolophus horseshoe nose bat had a coronavirus with 96% of its genome in common, which sounds high and a lot, but to put that in context, that's the same amount of genes we share with chimpanzees. So we know, yeah, I mean, our best guess is it probably originated from bats, but there was either an intermediate host or a mutation in a person, and it's something that really everyone is focusing hard on and researching to get answers. But even if we find out it's not from a bat, I think that association and that correlation will always be there in people's minds. And it's unfortunate because it is mostly a human-to-human transmission problem.
And if people want to educate themselves further on the problem and the misconceptions and try and help raise awareness to try and stop this from kind of snowballing, are there any good websites or anything like that that you're aware of, or any organizations that they could reach out to?
Yes, definitely. So as I mentioned, Bat Conservation International has an amazing website, very clear answers and questions. In the UK, there's a Bat Conservation Trust. Merlin Tuttle he's like the grandfather of bat photography, but his photos and work has done so much to change negative perceptions. For people who are interested, Give Bats a Break has started an annual Bat Twitter World Cup, which has been so much fun. And he's also started a podcast now. So there's really an awesome bat community online. There's so many people who are willing to engage. I myself am often on call or available for anyone who finds a bat or contacts me or asks questions, because I mean, it really takes nothing out of our day, but it makes a huge difference. So there's also various bat NGOs, there's rehab centers, but there's often bat interest groups in your area, in your region, if you're interested. So yeah, there's many different ways to get involved or join a bat walk or an approved cave visit. And yeah, you can definitely check out the different groups I mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite a niche kind of conservation side, but those who are in it, as we can see from talking with you, are very passionate about it. And even as we're talking now, we're getting some lovely comments about people saying about their experiences living along positively alongside bats. I've got a question coming through from Winnie. Hi, Winnie, another good supporter of the show. Always lovely to see your name. And she's asking, do you use bat meters to detect the bats in their caves?
Yes. Hi, Winnie. Thanks. So luckily, I don't really work much in caves. I'm usually trying to chase them and find them outside. But yes, at the moment, we're using wildlife acoustic son meters, but the bat detectors are great. There's different brands, different ones available, ones that plug into your phone, ones that plug into the computer. But it's a great non-invasive tool because, I mean, we didn't even talk about echolocation, but all bat species have a different echolocation signature. Some overlap and like to give you a hard time and confuse you, but it's a great way to then get an idea of how many bats are flying past, how many are in the area, what different species are they eating, are they just chatting to each other or flying past. So that's become a fundamental way of monitoring and studying bats.
And then, how, kind of following a bit on from Winnie's question there, how do you go about when you're saying that you're tagging the bats and that kind of stuff? How do you catch a bat?
So there's two main methods. Mist nets are also used for birds, just these thin, fine nets, but you got to get really lucky. A harp trap is usually easier, but it's all about placement. Our placement did not work this week across the river, and we all took a very cold swim for nothing. But that is, they just fly into these strings, and then they fall down and they crawl under a little flap, so we can grab them and it doesn't hurt them. And then there obviously are hand nets, but yeah, your two main ways on nets, which is why the bat detectors work so well as a complementary and alternative way, because as we've seen this week, the detectors showed there were so many bats around, but our nets were empty, and because it was windy and the bats are clever and they just fly around them, we didn't have much success. But obviously you need permits, you need to be trained and licensed, and it's quite strict on handling now, especially with a disease risk. It's full PPE and biosafety and all of that.
Okay, right, interesting. And then for those watching back home who still might need a bit of convincing, have you got any fun facts for us about bats that you think can change people's minds?
Yes, hopefully. I mean, if I couldn't convince you that they eat mosquitoes and keep your food safe and clean, they're actually, yeah, bats are really awesome. They're basically superheroes when it comes to immunity, and they're the only true mammal capable of true flight. They're also some of the longest lived animals for their size. The oldest known bat that we know of is over 41 years old. But my favorite fact to try convince people is that the nectar feeding bats in Mexico actually pollinate the agave cactus, which gives us tequila. So that's
So if you want your tequila, you need to keep the bats going. Is that what you're saying?
yes, there's even bat-friendly tequila now.
And what about with the students? Is there any facts that they love?
Oh yeah, well that one I couldn't tell the children,
No.
so I tried the mosquito one, but it didn't work so well. But yeah, basically people don't realize how many different tropical fruits the fruit bats pollinate and disperse seeds, mangoes, durian in Southeast Asia, bananas. I think there was a list of over 200 if I'm not mistaken. But just the fact that they aren't rats, they aren't flying rodents. A much better term is sky puppies or flittermouse. Yeah, we try very hard on Twitter to try convince people. And again, why the photographers have been so important as well, because they can be very cute. But also, I mean, the females, they kick all the males out. Some species, they have their babies together. They have a nursery and a creche. There's social calls that we're realizing. The vampire bats will even help feed each other if someone didn't find food that night. They're actually incredibly smart, social, caring species for something that people have just always disregarded because they don't see them, they don't really interact with them, and because they only fly at night and they seem so cryptic.
I mean, I love that. I wasn't really completely fully aware of the social hierarchy of the bat species. And I think that's another thing that is important to spread the message as well, is taken away from them as just being these flying rats. And I'm loving flying puppies, by the way. That needs to be a thing. But also, you know, it kind of, in a way, makes them seem more relatable if you're seeing that they are like looking after their young, and that it's like a sisterhood of women kind of all bringing up these pups together.
Yeah, definitely, exactly. And that's also something, it's another part that's so exciting from a bat researcher point of view. I mean, even 2019, there were 3 new species named in South Africa alone. There's constantly new facts coming out, new discoveries. We're still trying to figure out the species. But yes, definitely the social, we had no idea about the social calls. We thought they just echolocate to fly and find food. Now we're realizing there's a whole bunch of chattering going on. And definitely now that we're seeing more and more of their life cycle and their life history in caves or in captivity, realizing how social they are.
And we got another question coming through from Melanie. Hello, Melanie. She's normally watching from Germany, so I'm assuming she's there. Thanks again for tuning in. And she's asking, is there any danger at all to humans or pets from bats, or is the fear just in the minds of people?
So there is a small danger. Bats are known to carry different viruses. The problem we have is everyone thinks they carry more viruses or disease risk than other animals, and that's not true. In terms of their species diversity, it's normal. But yes, there are different diseases that bats carry. But like we always say to everyone, as long as you're not interacting with a sick bat and you're not harming them, then there's virtually no risk to you. So we always say, and that's the standard rule across the world, don't touch any bats without gloves. And that's to protect you and the bat. And there was quite a lot of concern of human COVID being transmissible to bats. So the bat researchers really became quite strict on work last year and this year to decrease that. In general of pets, I would say no. There's not anything that I'm aware of, but like with any wild animal, jackals, mongoose, anything, there's always going to be a disease risk. So it's just always better to be safe than sorry, but it's really not as bad and as predominant as people think it is.
And I suppose it's probably even less of a chance than what you could catch off another human.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, no, definitely at this rate. But it's also just because they've been so well studied and they're often the scapegoat, but because the diversity is so high, I mean, I think it's definitely less than what rats and mice can give to you.
Sure. And for those who, I mean, I guess it will depend on whereabouts in the world you are and what kind of species you're wanting to attract. But if there are people back home and they're wanting to play their part in helping with bat habitat and stuff like that and increasing and looking after numbers, then what would you say to encourage people and support and how people can support bat populations?
So my biggest one, the easiest thing is always just creating awareness and trying to change the negative perceptions, as that's quite an easy one. But yeah, as I said, probably the biggest, one of the biggest local threats, again, depending on region, is often just human-bat conflict in houses. People get annoyed with the noise and the mess, especially when you have a big colony. But people have to remember bats are protected in most places, so you can't exterminate them. It's also very cruel and unethical. So we just encourage people, contact your different bat groups. Yeah, I forgot to mention African Bat Conservation is doing an amazing job in Malawi and surrounds. They even have a hotline number because there are ways to mitigate ethically and exclude the bats so that they don't come back. And one of those ways, and what's part of my research, is looking at the different bat boxes available and seeing if supplementary artificial roosting sites can help bats and people. But as I said, there are various groups. There's usually activities to get involved in. Bat detectors are even becoming cheaper and more accessible for anyone. Maybe some of the birders will be convinced to change over to bats, as the bat calls are quite amazing as well, especially when you hear them in real time and in our human hearing range. And even just Facebook has many groups and many bat lovers for anyone who's interested. But again, our consumer choices, habitats, fragmentation and destruction is a problem for all species, not just bats. So any efforts towards that is probably going to make a huge, huge difference, which is one of the reasons I'm working in the agricultural sector at the moment. And
would people be encouraged to have things like bat boxes in their property if they have land and things like that, or would that be something you would discourage? Would you actively encourage people to attract bats to the landscape?
So that's quite a difficult one at the moment because, like, I usually say yes, but now that we're realizing we need to figure out which bat species like which design. So there are great websites like Bat Conservation International, and then they have designs available. They do encourage it, but in some places it didn't work. In some places it takes a long time for the bats to move in, and we're actually doing more and more research now to just make sure, like, just make sure we're having more of a positive effect than a negative effect. So like here, for example, I'm comparing white versus black boxes. Do some species prefer a hotter or colder one? So it is definitely an option, especially, so it is the best recommended solution for people who want bats out of their roofs and who do want to encourage them to urban areas and gardens and parks, because there is most likely a very low availability of natural sites. But in non-natural areas, that's where it gets more tricky, that we're trying to figure out. Like here, bats are pretty spoiled for choice in most places, but some of them seem to have moved in already. So that's ongoing research. But if you live in the cities, And in urban areas, I definitely suggest it for the animal lovers.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Alexandra. Well, I've only got one more question left, and then we'll start to wrap up. If you're watching back home and you have got a comment or a question that you would like to put towards us, please just pop it in the comment section and I will read it out for her. And if you're watching back home and it's not live, but you still would like to ask a question, please do so. Both of us are very happy to respond to any questions and try and kind of encourage and promote the bat lifestyle. So I always try and end things on a bit of a positive note. Conservation can get quite bleak. Some of the topics can get quite harsh. But what for you would you say so far? I know you're kind of starting out, but you've got quite a varied background already in conservation. What would you say is kind of your favorite success story so far?
I thought you meant this just for bats.
It could be any. I mean, if you've got a bat one and another one, I'll be happy to hear them both.
No, it's fine. Yeah, because like I said, generally changing people's minds about bats are quite rewarding. That's why I usually know my facts so well and so quickly. But recently, I think my favorite success story was working at the schools with my colleagues, and I really didn't expect such good feedback from the kids. Yeah, two young gentlemen, Mishak and Lidemo, came up after the class, and they honestly left. I am not often speechless, but they honestly left me speechless with their amazing questions. They were so insightful. It was our first school talk, and yeah, these two boys really blew me away. We were so proud. We were so impressed. So now they are our Bat Box ambassadors for that Blue Gombosh Secondary School in Kwakwa here in Free State. But it was really so sweet. I was so late because they just kept asking me such great questions, and it was such a rewarding day and a rewarding talk to realize even if you only change 2 minds out of 50, it was totally worth it.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I guess as well, you're opening up a different kind of possible career path for them as well. They might not ever have even thought about going down these kind of research conservation routes, particularly on such kind of niche topics and things like that. So potentially, you could be inspiring the next generation.
Hopefully, that's the plan.
I got another question coming through from Melanie, and she's asking, do bats suffer particularly from agricultural pesticides, and does this affect their ability to reproduce or any other adverse effects?
So that's also one question I'm asking. I am very concerned and worried about it, to be honest. There's only been some work done in Australia and America. So that's why I've been collecting guano. That's why I've been trying very hard to find ways to test it. And it's something I'm going to be looking at, because it would just make sense if these agricultural areas are so intensely sprayed, as they need to be for insect pests. And the bats are eating these pests, there must be some kind of effect. So no one's really looked at it yet. It's also another novel part, but that's basically my backup PhD at the moment, but it might be the PhD, but it's something that I am quite serious on looking into and making sure and trying to understand what's going on there.
So I'll watch this space, and hopefully more information will become available.
Yes, hopefully soon.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Alexandra, for coming on. We've had some lovely comments coming through as we've been talking, all very positive, all very kind, from all different areas of the world, which is always wonderful to see. Thank you, everyone back home, for tuning in. Always love seeing you guys, and really appreciate the support that you're giving to those who are working in conservation. As I always say, please do like, comment, and share on these posts. The more people that see them, the more awareness that we can raise, and the more people that can get involved in conservation. And Alexandra, anything that you'd like to finish up with before we say goodbye?
No, I think I just forgot to mention the Bat Facebook page is the QQ Bat Education Project that we just started the page. But that's if people are interested in following specifically the education project with the kids, that's where we'll be posting updates. But thank you very much, Kathleen. It was great.
No problem. So that's right. You heard her say, go check out their Facebook page. They've just started out. So they need all the support that they can get, and you'll be finding out all the incredible education stuff that they're doing. So thank you again, everyone, for tuning in. And thank you, Alex, for coming on. Again, absolutely loved having you on. And I just thought it was such an interesting topic and a subject that not many people know a lot about. So it was really nice to be able to delve a little bit deeper and find out why we should all care about these mammals.
Yes, thank you. It was great. Thanks,
Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.